This video tells the stories of 3 real-life events that started from seemingly small or trivial moments, but led to huge, unexpected outcomes. Some even changed the world. Each story contains the element of, but what happens next will shock you. What happens next will truly astonish you. Story 1. The Student and the White House. Break-in that shook the nation. In the spring of 2014, as cherry blossoms drifted through the air and the city bustled with tourists, a high school student named Ethan Wallace traveled to Washington, D.C. with nothing but wonder and curiosity on his mind. Hailing from a small town in Colorado, Ethan was the kind of teenager who often faded into the background. Quiet, polite, known for his love of history and his careful, measured demeanor. To him, the prospect of visiting the White House wasn't just an item on a class trip itinerary. It was a long-awaited pilgrimage, a chance to walk the same halls as presidents, to gaze upon portraits of leaders he'd only seen in books. On that morning, Ethan and his classmates arrived outside the White House gates, their nerves tingling with anticipation. Passing through tight security checks, they marveled at the gilded decor and grand architecture, their laughter echoing softly through the marble corridors. Ethan's heart pounded as he photographed chandeliers and oil paintings, careful not to miss a thing. The group pressed onward, eyes wide, as a tour guide recited facts about the East Wing, a space reserved for select tours and important guests. Amid the excitement, Ethan felt a nudge from his body, a subtle urge to find a bathroom. He politely raised a hand, asked the guide for directions, and was pointed down a quiet hallway to a set of public restrooms. He slipped away, waving at his friends, not thinking that such a small, everyday action might change the course of his day, or indeed the entire nation's. He finished quickly and stepped back into the corridor, expecting to see the familiar faces of classmates and teachers. But something was off. The once busy passage was now unsettlingly empty. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, dust motes spinning lazily through shafts of light. Gone were the giggles and chatter. Closed doors and silence replaced the earlier throng. Ethan's pace quickened as uncertainty mounted. Had his group left without him? Was he simply in the wrong hallway? He retraced his steps, but there was no sign of life, just the low hum of distant machinery and the clack of his shoes on polished floors. Then, without warning, 2 tall men appeared, a pair of Secret Service agents clad in classic black suits, mirrored sunglasses, and crisp earpieces. Their presence was commanding, their eyes sharp and unreadable. They blocked the hallway, their questions quick and direct. "Who are you? Which group are you with?" They spoke with an edge that brooked no argument. Ethan, caught off guard, could hardly form words. "I'm a student," he said shakily, "with the school tour. I just went to the bathroom." His explanation failed to satisfy. With the briefest of nods, the agents motioned for Ethan to follow. They brought him to a tiny room, bare, windowless, sterile. The door closed behind him with a decisive click. Instructions were terse. No phone use, don't leave, wait for further notice. As tension rose, confusion morphed into fear. The walls seemed to close in as Ethan perched on a plastic chair, mentally replaying each moment that led him there. He was just a kid, lost in the wrong place at the wrong time. But to the Secret Service, he was suddenly an unidentified individual in a danger zone, a potential security risk until proven otherwise. Questions flew. Name, date of birth, address, school, the names of teachers and chaperones. Every answer was double-checked. Every halting response met with cold formality. No hint was given as to what was happening outside. The first story shows us how a single misstep can shake the foundations of power. But not every turning point begins in chaos. Sometimes, it starts with a forgotten memory. And that brings us to our second story. Story 2. The legendary cassette and the unexpected reunion. On a dim, gray-tinted afternoon deep in the heart of a Liverpool suburb, Thomas Gray moved quietly through the narrow stairwell leading to his attic, trailed by faint beams of winter light filtering through the frosted window panes. In that attic lay more than dust and discarded instruments. It was a vault of years, echoing with laughter, arguments, and the strange alchemy of friendship that had once shaped the world-renowned band known as the Harmonies. Thomas's own story was knitted deep into this house, the walls vibrating with the memory of countless rehearsals, midnight inspirations, and silent grief. He had not visited the attic in years. It was simply too heavy, too full of the ghosts of youth and the promise of music that had in many ways defined his life. Today, his intention was humbled to something mundane, picking out a few relics, perhaps an old drumstick or a battered poster, to remind himself and anyone who visited his home of the journey he'd trekked. But as the hinges on the attic door creaked open, an unexpected adventure was about to begin. He sifted through piles of yellowing sheet music and faded stage costumes, letting nostalgia wash over him in gentle waves. Then, tucked away beneath a crust of dust and intertwined cobwebs, Thomas's hands found a small wooden box, humble and unadorned, but holding a mysterious weight. Its surface was scuffed from years forgotten. He pried it open with care, half expecting old picks, or perhaps Alex's lost harmonica. But gazing up at him from the velvet-lined bottom was only a single unmarked cassette tape. Questions flickered through his mind, mingling with a familiar curiosity from those rebel days when anything seemed possible. Why would someone take such care to obscure a simple tape? Whose memories was it meant to protect, or perhaps to reveal? Compelled by a hunch, Thomas returned downstairs, retrieving a dust-streaked cassette player from a shelf. The click of the tape joining the reader's teeth was barely audible, yet oddly final. Static crackled through the room, as if tuning an instrument that hadn't been heard in decades. A piano began its gentle stride, a melody that was haunting yet warm, carrying a sense of longing. As Thomas closed his eyes, letting the notes flutter around him, he was pulled back to a time when music was all that mattered. Then the voice began to sing, and everything stopped. Time seemed to stretch and collapse, as if the past had found a way through the chinks in the present. The voice, rich and mellifluous, soared above the piano chords. A voice that should not have been there. Alex Monroe. The moment Thomas heard it, 40 years fell away in an instant. He whispered the name, Alex Monroe, barely audible in the hush of his sitting room. Alex had been many things: lead vocalist, the creative soul of the Harmonies, Thomas's closest friend. But in 1981, he was taken abruptly and violently from the world. The shockwave of that tragedy had split the band, shattering dreams and leaving unhealed wounds in its wake. Yet now, Alex was singing once again, his voice uncannily untouched by time, earnest and raw, the edges frayed with emotion. Thomas sat transfixed as the song unfolded. It was only a demo, spare yet powerful. The lyrics spoke with uncanny prescience of lost opportunities, of bonds stretched but not broken, of yearning for unfinished business. In some verses, it almost sounded like Alex was singing directly to his old friends, as if the song had been written to bridge decades of silence. When the last note faded, Thomas remained rooted in stillness, alone with all the lifetimes that whispered through that melody. Hours passed in contemplation. The world outside darkened, a chilly fog pressing close to the window. But Thomas's mind, restless and alive, leapt forward to a resolution. This discovery was not just for him. There was someone else who needed to hear it. Peter Lang, the band's legendary guitarist, fellow dreamer, and Alex's confidant. The next day, Thomas pressed the cassette into Peter's trembling hands. The two men sat in silence as the tape played, Peter's eyes tearing up, his body tense with recognition. "This is Alex," he managed, fighting to control his voice. "But I've never heard this one before." Old memories resurfaced between them. The long nights, the endless rehearsals, the secretive ways Alex worked. A light flickered in Peter's thoughts. Late spring of '78. Alex told me he was writing something special. For a day that mattered. But he never said more. Those words were enough. Instinctively, Peter contacted Jacob and Elliot, the bassist and the keys player, uniting the voices of a family broken so many years before. The four men, battered but unbowed by time, gathered in a modern studio. Reverently, they played the old demo again and again, studying every note, every quiver in Alex's voice. Using cutting-edge technology, engineers carefully separated Alex's haunting vocals from the original piano. Over months, the band reconstructed the song, weaving their instruments around their friend's immortal voice. Lyrics and new arrangements were crafted, but everything, every drumbeat, chord, and harmony, served one purpose: to honor Alex's message, to complete the beautiful secret he left for them. Finally, they finished what Alex had started. The day they released Echoes of Tomorrow, a wave of awe circled the globe. Fans awoke to Alex Monroe singing, a song never heard before, vibrant as if he had joined them that very morning. Blogs and radios buzzed with the impossible. Forums filled with stories of listeners in tears, reliving old concerts, reconnecting with friends. Across continents, millions felt time fold in on itself, old wounds softly mended by new art. Yet it was the band's members who changed most. The music let them meet Alex again, not simply as a memory, but as a living, breathing artist guiding them through an inevitable reunion. It was a miracle, both technical and emotional. A band reborn with a friend's grace, their legacy now shimmering with the impossible. As the weeks wore on, journalists and fans pressed for an answer. How did the tape find its way to Thomas's attic? Some believed Alex, even in his absence, orchestrated this final act. Others said fate or luck, as random and beautiful as music itself, simply placed it within reach. But Thomas, Peter, Jacob, and Elliot knew better. Some melodies never die, some friendships never fade, and some gifts are given at the perfect moment. When the world quieted and the last chorus faded, one truth lingered above the rest. Music, memories, and the bonds of true companionship wait patiently in the silence, longing for someone brave enough to press play once more. An old cassette tape, a voice from the past, and an impossible reunion. Some things we thought were lost forever can unexpectedly return and change everything. But if you think the last stories were strange, this final one goes even further. Because this time, the person at the center didn't just change their own fate. They may have changed history itself. Story 3. The man who lost everything in a fire and created a game that changed the world. On an unremarkable spring morning in 1991, the sun cast a gentle glow across the sleepy town of Fairhaven, Oregon. In this stage of ordinary life, beneath towering pines and between rows of modest homes, Elliot Graves drove his battered sedan back from a routine trip to the grocery store. The radio played softly, a time-worn companion to his everyday errands. But as he turned down his familiar street, an unnatural shadow seemed to mar the day's peace. A dense, black plume of smoke rising urgently into the blue sky. Elliot's heart quickened. The column of smoke pointed, unmistakably, toward his neighborhood, toward his family's home. Panic wrapped itself around him like a vice. Gravel crunched sharply beneath the car's tires as he accelerated, familiar landmarks blurring past. He screeched to a halt at the curb, groceries forgotten. Before him, fire consumed everything he held dear. His house was already ablaze. Orange tongues of flame licked greedily at the roof and windows, smoke belching up in a furious pillar. The fire department worked desperately, but Elliot could see the futility in their efforts. The old timber, dry from years of mild summers and sharp winters, surrendered quickly, thirsting for the oxygen that fed the inferno. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, their faces pale and helpless. A firefighter gripped Elliot's shoulder, preventing him from rushing forward into the danger. In those endless, agonizing moments, all Elliot could do was watch, as the only home his family had known dissolved into a memory of sparks and embers. His wife and daughter, mercifully away on a visit to his mother-in-law, were safe. But everything else was gone, not just the tangible artifacts of a life, but the intangible soul, shaped over 10 years of laughter, arguments, birthdays, and goodnights. Photographs, keepsakes, beginnings of unfinished dreams, his entire world, reduced to char and smoke in less than an hour. The days that followed were marked by quiet displacement. Elliot and his family moved in with a neighbor, grateful but estranged from comfort. Nights stretched long, punctuated by hollow silences. Elliot lay awake and wrestled with the ache in his chest. It wasn't the loss of valuables that haunted him, but a deeper, more elusive pain. Why did it hurt to lose a chipped coffee mug? Why did an old, sun-bleached armchair matter so much? Or an outmoded computer full of unfinished programs? These were just things, or so he'd always thought. Unable to sleep, Elliot turned to a spiral-bound notebook. He wrote to fill the silence, to pick apart his grief. Entry after entry, he wrestled with questions. Why was it so hard to let go of the little things? Why, as he recounted what he had lost, did he only truly mourn those attached to a story, an emotion, a person? He came to realize that a house is not its walls or its roof, nor a home its furniture or gadgets. Home was the messy constellation of routines, quirks, fleeting moments, and above all, memories. It was a feeling built from layers of life lived, not a place that could be rebuilt with bricks and boards. Amid the fog of loss, a peculiar idea began to take hold. Elliot, a lifelong software enthusiast and tinkerer, had always dreamt of creating a game. But until now, the spark had never been quite right. He began to wonder, why not build a game that captured not just the mechanics of construction, but also the intangible essence of home? What if players could nurture not just houses, but the very experience of living, habits, emotions, relationships, even memories? Slowly, through grief, a vision crystallized. His old donated laptop clicked late into the nights. With trembling hands, he began to code the first lines of what he called home life. The pixels were clumsy, the interface basic, but the concept was unlike anything else. Players could create virtual people, Sims, with their own personalities and needs. They ate, slept, made friends, fell in love, quarreled, cried, and laughed. There was no singular objective. Instead, Elliot wanted people to simply live. The point, he decided, was living itself. When at last he had a working demo, Elliot packed his shyness and nerves into a battered briefcase and took his creation to game publishers. The reception was, at first, chilly. In boardrooms across Silicon Valley, men in suits chuckled. Who would want to play a game, they asked, where the grand challenge was? Doing chores. Teaching a character to brush their teeth, tidy up, or cook dinner. One executive asked pointedly, "Isn't real life enough of a routine already?" Rejection letters piled up. Still, Elliot pressed on, driven by something deeper than hope, by the hard-won understanding of what the small moments mean. Finally, a fledgling company called Nova Interactive saw more than quirky mechanics. They saw something profoundly human. They saw, in his game, an attempt to digitalize the soul of home, to let players shape their own stories, big and small. With their encouragement and support, Elliot poured every lesson from his loss into the burgeoning project. In 1999, Home Life emerged into the world, rebranded as The Life Within. Almost no one predicted its astonishing success. Within 6 months, over 1 million copies sold. Players didn't just play, they shared. Stories flooded online forums and magazines, tales of perfect families, messy roommates, tender heartbreaks, new beginnings, and futures imagined. Some recreated lost relatives as digital memory portraits. Others used the game to practice parenting before the birth of a first child. The lines between simulation and reality blurred. For many, play became catharsis, healing for old wounds and gentle rehearsal for new dreams. The Life Within soon swept across continents under its global title, The Sims, igniting a new genre and introducing millions to the pleasures and follies of digital life. It became the best-selling PC game of a generation, and a quiet revolution in how video games could empathize, entertain, and illuminate what it means to be human. In the end, Elliot Graves did not just rebuild what the fire had taken. From the ashes, he created a space where millions could rediscover, and sometimes even redefine, the meaning of home. The game was his way of sharing a hard-learned lesson, that the true heart of any house lies not in walls or things, but in the beautiful, messy art of a life lived inside. And so, one man's loss became the world's mirror, reflecting back our deepest hopes, losses, and loves, pixel by pixel, memory by memory.